Welcome. Reading Goodnight Stories with Bored Grandma. Hello, grandchildren. Grandma here. Are you ready for bed? Do you have your teeth brushed? If so, then here we go. Tonight I'm going to read to you Thumbelina. Once upon a time, there was a woman who wanted very much to have a tiny little child. But since she didn't know where to find one, she went to see an old witch. "I want very much to have a tiny little child," she told the witch. "Do you, who are so wise, know where I can find one?" "Indeed I do," replied the witch. "Here is a barley corn for you. It may look like an ordinary grain of barley, such as farmers grow in their fields, but it's not. Plant it in a flower pot the moment you get home. You shall see what you shall see." "Thank you," said the woman. And she gave the witch 12 pennies to pay for the barley corn. Then she hurried home and planted it, as the witch had told her to do. In a short while, a fine big flower came up. It looked very much like a tulip, but the petals were tightly closed, as though it were still a bud. "What a beautiful flower," said the woman, and she kissed it on its folded petals. At this, the flower opened with a loud pop. It was indeed a tulip, and in the center, on the green cushion of the flower, sat a tiny girl. She was as pretty as could be, but she was no bigger than your thumb. The woman was delighted. "I shall call her Thumbelina," she said. At night, Thumbelina slept in a polished walnut shell, on a mattress made of blue velvet petals. In the daytime, she played on a table, on which the woman placed a plate filled with water, surrounded by many flowers. Thumbelina amused herself by floating across the plate of water on a tulip leaf, rowing with 2 oars made of horsehair. It was a joy to watch her, and to hear her sing in a voice as clear as a tiny silver bell. Surely such singing had never been heard before. One night, as she lay in her pretty little bed, a big, ugly old toad hopped through her broken window and jumped right on the table where Thumbelina lay sleeping. "What a lovely creature," said the old toad to herself. "She will make a charming wife for my son." And with that, she picked up the walnut shell with Thumbelina in it and leaped through the window again, back into the garden. A broad stream flowed through the garden, and in the marshy banks the old toad lived with her son. Ugh, he's even uglier than his mother. When he saw the pretty little girl in her lovely bed, all he could say was, "Croak, croak, croak." "Shh," said his mother. "Don't talk so loud. You'll wake her and she'll fly away, for she's as light as a thistledown. We'll put her on a big water lily leaf in the middle of the stream, so she won't get away, while we prepare our best room under the marsh for you to live in after you're married." Many water lilies grew in the stream. Their broad leaves floated in the water. The largest of the leaves was much farther from the shore than any of the others, and on this leaf the old toad placed the walnut shell with the sleeping girl on it. When Thumbelina woke up the next morning and saw where she was, she began to weep bitterly, for there was water all around the leaf, and no way to reach the shore. Meanwhile, the old mother toad was working hard down in the mud, getting her home ready to receive her new daughter-in-law. At last she swam out to the leaf with her horrible son. They came to take Thumbelina's pretty little bed down into the bridal chamber before the bride herself was conducted into it. The old toad bowed low in the water and said, "This is my dear son. He is to be your dear husband, and you will live happily together down in the thick mud." Crack, crack, back, 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 was all her son could say. Then they took the little bed and swam away with it, leaving Thumbelina weeping on the green leaf, for the thought of living in the mud with the old toad and her son was more than she could bear. The little fishes swimming in the water under the leaf had heard everything. Now they lifted their heads out of the water to see the little girl. "What a darling she is," they said, and were most distressed at the thought of her living down in the mud with the hideous toad. No, no, such a thing must never be. So all the fish surrounded the green stalk of the water lily leaf and gnawed it with their teeth until the leaf was separated from the stalk and floated away down the stream, carrying Thumbelina with it, far away from the toad and her son. Past many towns sailed Thumbelina, and the birds in the trees saw her and sang, "What a beautiful little girl!" On and on floated the leaf until at last it came to another land. Thumbelina laughed and sang as she floated along, for now there was nothing to fear, and the land through which she sailed was very beautiful. The sun, shining on the water, turned it to liquid gold, and the air was filled with the fragrance of many flowers. At last the leaf floated too close to the shore and became caught among some of the stones jutting out into the water. But Thumbelina was able to leap safely to the shore. All summer long, Thumbelina lived alone in the forest. She wove a bed for herself out of some blades of grass, and she hung the little bed under a burdock leaf so that she could be sheltered from the rain. She dined on honey, which she sucked from the flowers, and she drank the dew each morning from the leaves. In this way, the summer and the fall went by, and then came the long, cold winter. All the birds who sung so sweetly for her had flown away. The trees lost their leaves, and the flowers withered. The burdock leaf under which she had lived shriveled up until nothing was left of it but a withered stalk. Thumbelina was terribly cold, for her clothes had been worn threadbare, and she was a delicate little thing. She would surely freeze to death. Snow began to fall, and every time a snowflake struck her, it was as if she were hit by a shovelful, since she was scarcely larger than a snowflake herself. Poor Thumbelina wandered around, seeking a warm place to spend the winter. Near the edge of the wood, where she had now arrived, stood a large cornfield, but the corn had been cut months ago, and nothing remained but hard stubble sticking up from the frozen ground. It was like struggling through a vast forest to Thumbelina. Then she came to the door of a field mouse, who had a little hole under the stubble. It was a warm and cozy house, and the mouse was happy, for she had a room full of corn, as well as a kitchen and fine dining room. Thumbelina knocked on the door, and when the field mouse opened it, she begged for a little barley, because she hadn't had anything to eat for 2 days.
"You poor thing,"
said the field mouse, who was really a kind-hearted old creature.
"Come in and have dinner with me.
She took such a liking to Thumbelina that she said,
If you like, you may stay here all winter. Of course, I shall expect you to keep my rooms clean and tell me stories. I'm very fond of stories."
Thumbelina did as the field mouse asked, and in return she was well treated and made comfortable. One day the field mouse said to her,
"We shall have a visitor soon. He's my neighbor who visits me every week. He is very rich, his rooms are very grand, and he wears a beautiful black velvet coat. What a good husband he would make for you. He can't see anything, so you must tell him some of your best stories."
But Thumbelina knew this neighbor was a mole and did not care to please him. He came to visit, dressed in a black velvet coat. He asked Thumbelina to sing for him, and she did so. She sang, "Ladybug, ladybug, fly away home," and other pretty songs. He was so charmed by her lovely voice, and the mole fell in love with her then and there. But being a cautious fellow, he said nothing. He had just dug a large tunnel under the ground from his house to that of the field mouse, and he now gave them permission to use it whenever they pleased. "There's a dead bird in the passage," he warned, "but don't let that frighten you." The mole took a torch of decayed wood in his mouth, and it shone like fire in the darkness, lighting the way for them. He led his friends through the tunnel, and when they came to the spot where the dead bird lay, the mole pushed a hole through the ceiling with his broad nose so the daylight could shine through. It shone on the body of a swallow. His pretty wings were folded, and his head and claws were almost hidden under his feather. "Poor dear thing," thought Thumbelina. "He must certainly have died of the cold." She waited until the others had turned away, and then she smoothed the feathers on the bird's head and kissed his closed eyelids. "Perhaps it was you who sang so sweetly to me in the summertime, darling bird," she whispered. The mole closed up the hole that let the daylight in, and then he took the ladies home. That night Thumbelina could not sleep for thinking of the poor swallow. She got up and wove a warm rug out of some soft hay. She took it to the dead bird and spread it all over him, and tucked him down with some soft thistle down that she found in the field mouse room, so that he could lay warm in the cold earth. "Goodbye, dear pretty bird," she said. "Thank you for all your songs last summer, when the trees were green and the sun shined so brightly." As she said this, Thumbelina pressed her head against the dead bird's breast. Then she gave a cry of surprise. She had heard a faint heartbeat inside the bird. It was the swallow's heart. He was not dead, only numb from the cold. Thumbelina was overjoyed. She covered the bird more closely with the down, and she ran and brought her own coverlet and balsam leaf to spread over his head. The following night she tiptoed out to him again. He was alive and able to move, but still very weak. He opened his eyes for a moment to look at Thumbelina, who stood with her lantern, a piece of torchwood, in her hand. "Thank you, dear child," whispered the swallow. "I feel much better now, and soon I'll be strong enough to fly out into the warm sunshine." "Oh no," cried Thumbelina. "You must not go outside now. It is winter and very cold. You must stay here in the warm bed and let me take care of you." She brought the bird some water in a flower petal. The swallow drank it gratefully, and then told her how he had hurt his wing on a thorn bush and could not fly as fast as his brothers. They had flown on far, far away to the warm countries, while he had fallen unconscious to the ground. That was all he remembered, and he had no idea how he came to be there in the passage. The swallow stayed in his warm bed all winter. Thumbelina cared for him tenderly, and when spring came, the swallow was well and strong again. Thumbelina opened the hole in the ceiling made by the mole, and the warm sunshine poured into the tunnel. The swallow begged the little girl to fly away with him into the green wood. "You can sit on my back," he said. But Thumbelina shook her head. She knew how vexed the field mouse would be if she left like that. "No, I cannot go with you," she said. "I really can't." "Goodbye then, you pretty darling," said the swallow, and away he flew into the sunlight. Thumbelina watched him go, and tears streamed down her eyes, for she loved the swallow very much. Now Thumbelina was truly sad. She was not allowed to go into the sunshine. Moreover, the grain that sown over the field above the field mouse house grew so tall that it was like a dense forest.
"Well now,"
said the field mouse to Thumbelina one day after this,
"you must start to work on your wedding clothes. Mr. Mole has asked for your hand in marriage, you lucky girl."
She set Thumbelina to work turning the spindle, and she hired 4 spiders to weave day and night. Every evening the mole came to call, and he always spoke of the time when summer would be over. Then they would be married. Just now the sun shone so hotly that it burnt the ground and made it hard as stone. Thumbelina disliked the mole and did not listen to his tiresome conversation. She wished that she might see the dear swallow again, but he had doubtless flown far away, for he never came back. Then it was autumn, and Thumbelina's wedding day was at hand. All was in readiness. The mole came to fetch his bride and take her with him to his home underground. The little girl could not bear to think that she would never see the bright sunshine again. She ran to the door to have a last look at it. "Goodbye, dear son," she said. Then she ventured a little way from the door and threw her arms around a red flower growing close by. "Give my love to the swallow if you ever see him," she cried. Tweet, tweet, tweet! She suddenly heard a twittering above her head. She looked up, and there was a swallow flying past. He saw Thumbelina, and he flew down to her, overjoyed at seeing his dear friend again. Thumbelina told the bird everything that had happened since he left, and now she hated to marry the mole and live underground. As she talked, Thumbelina could not hold back the tears. "Winter is coming soon," the swallow said, "and I am flying far away to the warm countries. Come with me. You can sit on my back. Tie yourself on with your sash, and we will fly far away from the ugly mole and his dark house. Please come with me, dear little Thumbelina. You saved my life when I was frozen in the tunnel. Let me help you now." "Yes, I will come with you," said Thumbelina. She sat on the bird's back with her feet resting on his outspread wings, and tied her sash to his strongest feather. Then the swallow rose up into the air and flew high over the forest and lake, far away from the snow-capped mountains. At length they came to the warm countries. How bright the sun shone, and how high the sky seemed! Thumbelina could only stare around her with wonder and delight. By the wayside were hedges on which grew marvelous green and blue grape. Lemon and oranges hung from the trees. The air was fragrant with scent of myrtle and thyme, and along the country lanes happy children were chasing brightly colored butterflies. The swallow flew on until at last they came to a lovely blue lake. By its side stood a white marble castle, shaded by tall trees. "This is my home," said the swallow, "but I think you'll be happier living among the flowers rather than in a tree." "That would be lovely," said Thumbelina. So the swallow flew down with her to the ground and placed her on a petal of a large white flower, one of many blooming all around the castle. But how surprised Thumbelina was to see in the center of the flower a little man, as shiny and transparent as if he had been made of glass. On his head was a tiny golden crown, and he wore a pair of shiny wings on his shoulders. He was scarcely taller than Thumbelina. He was the spirit of the flower. Such a tiny man or maid lived in every flower, but he was the king of them all. "Oh, how beautiful he is," Thumbelina whispered to the swallow. The flower king was startled to see the swallow, who seemed a giant of a bird to one so tiny. But when he saw Thumbelina, he was charmed. He thought her the prettiest girl he had ever seen. So he took his crown and placed it on her head. Then he asked if he might know her name, and begged her to marry him and be his queen of all the flowers. Here was a different kind of husband from the toad's son or the mole with his black velvet coat. Thumbelina replied, "Yes, at once." At this, all the other flowers opened, and out of them came little ladies and gentlemen. They all gave Thumbelina a present. But the best present of all was a pair of transparent wings, which they fastened to Thumbelina's shoulders so that she could fly from flower to flower. The swallow watched from a nest above and sang his sweetest song, though he was sad at heart to part from the little girl whom he loved so much. "Goodbye, goodbye," sang the swallow, flying away to a home in faraway Denmark. There he had a nest outside the window of a man who could tell fairy tales. For him the swallow sang many sweet songs, and that is how we came to know this story. Please like and subscribe. The end. Now off to dreamland you go.